computer this time, and then I'll post it on. I'll post it on YouTube later once it's processed. Oh, hi.
Awesome.
That's us recording, actually. So.
Oh, yeah, it's fine. I can edit it and all that.
At my end, yeah. Thank you. Welcome anybody who's viewing. This is Christian McNeill, based in Glasgow, and I'm delighted to be speaking today with Amir Karkouti. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Brilliant. You said it perfectly.
Who is in Southern California. I'm not sure exactly where you are, Amir, but I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I first approached Amir some time ago, and then it kind of fell off the radar, I think, for both of us. And you are the author of a recently published book, What the Bleep Are the Three Principles? And I just think you've got a very interesting kind of constellation in terms of your involvement with the principles, because you are an author. This is not your first book, and you can tell us more about that. You're also a businessman, as I understand that you run a number of restaurants. You're a restaurateur, and I think there may be more businesses in there. And you also work as a coach, and you particularly work in the field of recovery, which is one of my own areas of special interest. So I just love to hear a bit more about you. You know, how you got to where you are now, and and just whatever you want to share. So with that, over to you.
Well, I was going to say, what a wonderful memory. First of all, I just got anxious thinking all the stuff I'm doing right now. I'm like, oh man, I'm writing a book. I'm out of the recovery center. I have coaching clients. But all the things that you described are absolutely stuff I love to do. So I forget that it's work. It's actually really nice. I'm looking back, and people say, how do you fit all that in? Because I also have a wife. I also have a daughter. I also have free time for myself. But it's funny when there's things that you want to do and you love, if it sorts itself out. So I do live in San Diego. I live in Carlsbad specifically, about 5 minutes away from the beach. So anyone that wants to come down and visit, you guys are welcome to come. And yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to be here. My latest book, I actually have 2 books out. My latest one is What the F Are the Three Principles? And my other one, which is if this is going to be on YouTube, they can see it. It's called 3 Principles, Strategies and Technique book. This just came in. This is the proof.
Oh, wow.
I won't say much about it besides what you said, because I don't want to get into how can I have strategies and techniques in the 3 principles. You're going to have to just buy the book.
So, Amir, I actually genuinely don't know this. Of how did you come across the 3 principles? I mean, I do think it's fascinating how different people find this elusive truth that is so transformative, and yet it's not yet very widely known in our world.
So, what was it, 9-10 years ago? I don't remember how long ago it was. I used to be an NLP practitioner. I used to do hypnotherapy. And I noticed that sometimes when I was doing neurolinguistic programming, it would work. And other times it would do absolutely nothing. And then I said, maybe it's because my techniques weren't good enough. And I realized there was days where I showed up just with crap technique, just terrible. And they got it. And they're like, wow, I feel so much better. And like, thank you. And then there's times where I really studied the technique, really studied what's going on with them, and it just fell flat. So I knew that it wasn't the tech. It had to be something. And the common denominator I noticed is when they saw something new, something shifted. That was constant. And the second thing I noticed is that with or without me, they could see something new and they could shift. So I started to question the idea of strategies and tools as a way to have people shift. I was like, there's got to be another common denominator. And around that time, Jamie Smart had written a book called Effortless Evolution. He sent out an email to his list and said, look, I'm not doing an NLP anymore. I'm actually getting rid of my salad company, and I'm trying something new. I don't know how to explain it yet, but here's a little bit of what I've written, and it was Effortless Evolution. And that answered so many of my questions. And then in there, he had one sentence that said, I worked with a guy named Michael Neal. So I immediately went, okay, who's this Michael Neal guy that he's talking about? And the rest was history.
That's interesting. It was Jamie who introduced me to this around about the same time, because although I was a lawyer at that stage, I was also trained in NLP and hypnotherapy for quite a long time, and it was a sort of small side thing that I did. But I also had that experience of sometimes it works and sometimes it didn't. And also I noticed that, sometimes a client would be in trance and it would be like they would have a shift for themselves that was nothing to do with anything I was suggesting. Even when I was feeding back their words, they would take an extra leap. And when that happened, it was always incredibly powerful. And they would often kind of attribute it to me, but really I could see that they'd sort of done it themselves. Yeah. Yeah. So I really identified with what you're talking about there, and it's noticing how what we're calling the three principles is a description of what's always been going on, but it was just sort of the elusive obvious up until
Yes, of course.
Coming to this point. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember after seeing the truth of the principles and how our experience actually works, I went back. I loved listening to Richard Bandler, one of the founders of NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And I remember he was talking to a gentleman, and he was not happy in his life. He had a lot of thinking around his marriage and so on and so forth. And Richard Bandler said, well, if I had a ugly picture in your room, what would you do if there's an ugly, like a photo or a picture in your room? And he would say, I'd remove it and put a better one on. And everyone's like, yeah, exactly. That's what we're going to do today. But I realized with the principles, it's showing people it's just a picture on the wall. And if you can see that, then yes, sometimes the pictures are going to be gross. Sometimes they're going to be great. But if you can see that the only thing you're up against is a picture of the wall or a thought that can look disturbing. And the difference between a picture on the wall is you don't have to do anything to change it. There's going to be people that would come and remove it for you and add, better photos or different photos every moment. That never occurred to me because it made so much sense to always change the picture, make it a better picture, make it a different color, expand the picture, shrink the picture, and all the stuff we did in NLP. But it never occurred to me that if you go one step back, it's just a effing photo. What are we so afraid of?
Yeah.
And that was my that's when I actually really got the gist. Like I answered that for myself for the first time in regards to what I finally found with the principles that changed everything for me.
Oh, lovely. I like that.
Yeah.
I may borrow that with your permission.
Oh, yeah, please do.
Excellent. So you came across Jamie's work, and that led you to Michael Neal, and I'm guessing you did some training with him from where this is going.
Well, so I did training with several people. Michael Neal, I used to go literally every month. He had an event up in LA where he would have different speakers speak. I just followed him all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Every time he had an event, I was there. It just, my world expanded more and more. And one of the biggest things that I remember that shifted everything for me. Do you mind if I tell a quick story?
Please, whatever. Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
So I remember, I was still transitioning from NLP to the principle. So I was very skeptical. As much as I loved Michael, I didn't buy into it. I was like, this can't be this easy. This can't be just as simple as everyone's making out in the principles. You walk into from when I was in a neuro-linguistic field, the guy in the front would give strategies and people would get up and sit down and talk to each other and try to do state changes. Well, with Michael, it wasn't like that. And so I raised my hand one day. We were in a seminar in Seattle. And I said, Michael, let me ask you something. During 9/11, when the Twin Towers got hit, Tony Robbins had, I think, 2,000 people in a room. I don't know what it was. There's a huge amount of people in a room. And he was able to get this Muslim guy and a Jewish guy up on stage and become friends by the end of the conversation. And I said, and you're saying we don't need tools and techniques and stuff. Mr. Michael Neal, and I crossed my arms and I said, what would you have done? And I thought I was going to stump him, oh, you know what? Here's what we would have done with the principles. And he sat there for a minute and he reflected. And he said, I'd probably give somebody a hug. And in the back of my mind, there was a space, the space where when my head is spinning, I would say, well, that's not good enough. And how dare you? That's why you're not Tony Robbins. And there was the bigger part that said, I would probably do that too.
Mm.
And that's when I went, when we stop hiding behind what we think are tools and techniques, the first thing that may come up for us first may not look like an extravagant tool or technique, but it might be just what you and the person needs. And it never occurred to me, I was so busy getting ahead of myself when someone is hurt that I was 8 steps ahead of them and try to fix them instead of be with them. I forgot that part of our humanity. And Michael just hit me smack in the face with that. That he wasn't interested in giving me a, to help alleviate my spinning in my head, to help alleviate my ego. He wasn't interested in that. He gave me his truth in that moment, and I heard it loud and clear. And that was the first time I got permission to show up as with what I have in that moment. And the principles, one of the beautiful things about the principles is you cannot substitute our humanness, our humanity, what we have in the moment, with any tool and technique. And that's something that no other paradigm has shown me.
Yeah. It's so reassuring, isn't it? I mean, just that sense of that we are enough and we have within us everything that we need for whatever situation. And I was supposed to do a talk here in Glasgow recently for some law students, and it was cancelled with really bad weather. But that was my first point. The title of it was 5 Things I Wish I'd Learned in Law School. But one of them was just that sense of you are enough. And it's funny, I remember going to a training when I was a newly qualified lawyer, and there was a guy who came along and he had all these sort of great war stories, and everyone ended with "Wallop, not guilty." And by the end of it, I just had no sense of being better equipped for the job. I had no sense that would ever be happening to me. But when you describe Michael's response and your own sense of the truth of it, knowing that there's something so powerful about knowing that we are enough, that we have enough, that authenticity is so much more powerful than cleverness, tools, techniques. I mean, there's a place for learning, there's a place for skills and so on, but it's trumped every time, I'd say, by just that being who I am. I suddenly got distracted. What's that behind you? What is that behind you in your picture? It's like 4.
So that's my dog.
Oh no, sorry. On the other side, 4 pink towers.
Oh, that's just my little daughter's table, chair, upside down. Oh, that's so funny. You know what? I should probably move all this stuff before I do a YouTube video. My wife always gets mad at me. She's like, "You have the dirtiest office."
Oh, that's not my point. No, I was just so intrigued. I couldn't work out what it was at all.
Yeah, it's a chair upside down.
Thank you for that. We digress.
Yeah, and we digress.
So coming back to your own personal journey, were you already at that stage you doing some work in the field of recovery, or is that something that happened after you got you gained an understanding of the principles?
So to be honest with you, the recovery has only been about a year. And it was by accident. It wasn't that wasn't my field. I don't have a background in recovery. I'm not a recovering addict personally. What had happened is, going along the lines of what we just discussed about being in the moment with someone, one of my really good friends who is a therapist came to me about writing a book, wanted to know how to write a book. And he said, Amir, you've written 5 or 6 books and I can't get myself to write one book. And I said, well, tell me how writing a book looks to you. He goes, well, when I sit down, I need to write this book and I'm giving myself 3 months. And if I don't write this book, then I'm not a good enough person. And I went, wow, your writing a book looks a lot different than mine. And I started to say, I said, I never wrote a book. I wrote a couple sentences that turned into a paragraph, which turned into a chapter. And then once I was done, I went, holy crap, I just wrote a book. And at no point does it have any more meaning than me putting my hands on a typewriter and writing. And he came in for a prescription, and he saw something about, wow, I put a lot of thinking about something called the book. So every time he sat down, he had to write the book. And when I sat down, it's, oh, I wonder what's on my mind. I'll just start typing away with what's going on in this moment. And he saw something in that, and I don't know what it was. And he came back to me a week later and said, you know what, Amir? I'm a recovering addict. I went to school and became a licensed marriage and family counselor. I just moved into a new place. I have a new girlfriend. I've got my photography business going. And here I am putting so much pressure, not realizing what I've done already in my life. And so right there, he said, I don't think I need to write a book right now. I think what I've done in my life is good enough. And when this book appears, I will sit down and write it freely and joyfully. And then right after that, he goes, that thing you did with me, Amir, could you do that at my recovery center? And I was terrified. And I all of a sudden did the same thing he did with his book. I was like, the recovery center. And all of a sudden I said, crap, I don't know anything about recovery centers. And then I went to him and I literally said, like, I've never been a recovering addict. I don't know how to speak to them and all that stuff. And he looked at me and said, well, if you're going in there talking to people that are addicted, blah, 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 well, you're going to have a problem. But if you go in there talking to people, it's going to be very easy because you've done that before. He literally flipped it on me. He became a principles practitioner and he didn't know it because he went to our humanness and he saw the thing that I was saying too. It was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. So that's how I got in there. And he's absolutely right. I go and talk to amazing people every single week. Literally. Here, I'm going to move this like this for a minute. And it's all I do. I just talk to people. I show up from where I'm at, and they're not recovering addicts to me. They're not people that need help. It's like what you and I are doing, two people having a dialogue about life.
So do you are you working one-to-one with people there, or a group, or a bit of both?
Group. So group. I do groups. So depending on how many people are in the group, it's either co-ed or they separate it from the men and the women, depending on how many people.
And I'm curious because I do have a background in recovery. I was an alcoholic, and I did the whole AA thing. So I'm always curious, and I think AA is a great organization. I'm not, somebody who's knocking it, but I'm curious how they sit with the people that you're working with. Do you get people objecting that this doesn't sit with the steps, or do you get any of that stuff, or has that not been a problem at all?
So luckily, obviously, with me being in there, they're very, very non-traditional. They do 12 steps. They also have shamans that do shaman work. They do tea time where you sit and learn about different teas from different cultures. And so they're not really solely 12 steps, which is nice. However, the part that is important to me, why I don't get into the specifics of, well, is 12 steps better than the principles, or is this better than that? Because the common denominator, like we talked about originally with why NLP worked, is that if somebody gets an insight, that's all that is needed to move to a different direction. So if they get their insights in 12 steps, great. If they get an insight, being drunk and going to see their father, at the cemetery, then great. The common denominator isn't the cemetery, the 12 steps, the principles, is that we all have a capacity to see something new. Yeah. That's the common denominator. Yeah. So it doesn't matter. I don't care. If you go to the 12 steps, great. Just be open to seeing something.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I think one of the things that's helpful for me to know is that everybody I know who's sober in AA or elsewhere, that happened on a moment of insight. I haven't met anybody who kind of cut down or, have controlled it, willed their way into it. It happened with a change at depth, fresh thinking, a big shift, a big internal shift that usually happens spontaneously and sometimes with no, often, from a moment of despair, actually, which just shows that it can come through at any time.
Yeah, and that's what I point to in my group. I mean, even the person that created the 12 steps or imagined it, saw it from a point of insight, saw it from, wait a minute, we don't have to be this way. And he created a whole system. But what people don't realize is when you go before the system, the common denominator always is a fresh thought, is always them in their worst time, in their worst space. That part is never broken. I don't care what you've done in your life, the capacity to see something new is never broken. I've yet met anybody at any stage of their life, whether it's depression, social anxiety disorder, whatever you say, that they have not been able to say something or see something new. And the problem I think that we get is that it's like, well, why is it not happening fast enough? Why is it not happening, on my time and on my terms? And that's when we get into our own personal thinking. And that's one of the reasons that we don't see anything new, is because we think it's supposed to be on our time.
Yeah. It's like the one thing you can do to stop yourself is to try and hurry it up.
Right.
To fight it. Yeah. Yeah. And so sort of moving from there tell me more about your books. You have written books prior to getting into the principles, is that right? And you've kind of your direction has evolved as you've come to understand this, or have I got that wrong?
Michael Neal and Jamie Smart kind of screwed me up because I wrote a book called Happiness Formula, and it was literally strategies and tools. And once I got my own insight of like, the stuff I wrote really didn't work all the time either, and it worked some of the time. And it was kind of like, crap, I can't buy this. I didn't even really buy it when I was writing it, but it was the best thing I had. So it wasn't that I was being a liar. It's like, until I get a better option, this is really what we've got. So, let's try this. And then once I kind of got a better understanding of the principles, that changed. And so, yeah, I would say don't get Happiness Formula. Don't buy it, even though it's on Amazon, unless you want to. And my most proudest book is, What the F Are the Three Principles. That is my most recent book, my most heart-pouring book. It's one of my only books where you can see my personality, who I am in the book. And I held nothing back. And knock on wood, it's resonated with people. I was terrified. I'm like, maybe in a community that's spiritual, I should kind of tone it down. There's people that are, really sick out there or hurting out there. And I'm kind of, am I mocking this, this paradigm and all this stuff? And I just did it anyway. And it's resonated. And I guess it was something that needed to be heard for people. So I'm happy that I got that kind of recognition.
Yeah, it's great. I got it this week knowing that we were doing this call, and I think you open with a very powerful story about your response to what could have been a very distressing potential piece of information from a doctor, and I think it's lovely how you illustrate that the potential diagnosis, the potential prognosis, do not actually have the power to create any particular feeling in you or indeed in anyone. And again, I resonated very powerfully with that because quite soon after I got into the three principles, I had a situation where an emergency room and doctor was saying to me, "Well, we think you've had a brain hemorrhage, and once we've admitted you, we'll be doing a lumbar puncture." All of which was like, and in that moment, then they walked out and left me on my own in this room. And in that moment, I felt just complete peace, clarity. Just difficult to, very much grounded and centered. I mean, it was quite an extraordinary experience, and I don't say it wasn't any kind of merit on my part, if you like. It was just I knew it was a sort of gift that I was, that I could equally have been roaring and greeting, or I could have been in a terrible state, but as it happened, I wasn't. On that day, my thoughts cleared, and I thought, right, well, just the next thing and the next thing. And I also had some clarity about how I wanted to spend my life, assuming whoever was left of it,
Right.
which hopefully is that it wasn't a brain hemorrhage, and hopefully it's a while yet. But yeah. So but it was a very powerful opening, I thought.
Yeah, and what's nice about the principles is I did have moments once the doctor told me what's going on where I cried and I was angry and I was ready to kill the doctor that prescribed. But what the principles don't say is that you're always, let's find you to be in a better mood. What the principles share is that you will experience all of experience.
Yeah.
And the good news is it's only going to be an experience. And that to me was very useful, which meant I didn't have to sidestep some of the feelings. Like if they were from indifference up to happiness, okay, those are good ones. And then from indifference to sadness, those, let's fix those. Because that's what modern psychology points to, is like they give this idea that when you're from here to happiness, okay, you're well on your way. But when you're down here, and then what do we do once we're in a lower mood with traditional psychology? We spend hours talking about it. We talk about how miserable it is and why it's like this. And then we're trying to find a solution to being in better mood by dissecting the worst mood that we're in. And then we go, I hope you feel better. Thanks for talking about how crappy you feel for the next hour. Hopefully by the time I see you next week, you'll feel good enough that when you get back here, we can talk about the crappy feeling again. And it just does, it stops making sense for me. That doesn't make sense. And so logically, sensibly, we're in a better mood when we're in a better mood. Not put yourself in the worst possible mood to get yourself in a better mood. It stops, that just doesn't make sense to me anymore. Maybe I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not saying psychologists are doing this. I'm just saying the idea is to sit down and talk about your problems and to find a resolution. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I've seen an alternative that's just been way more impactful.
Yeah. One of the early kind of illustrations that one of my teachers gave, maybe Jamie, was just doing that, saying that how human beings go through life is just that up and down, and it's something I've adopted. But it was very, very powerful for me, because I had spent at that point 20 years trying to feel better. I mean, it had really been a sort of full-time job, and was ever more so. There are more and more things getting added on, meditation, morning pages, our daily walk, sort of inventory, all of this stuff. And of course, I wasn't able to keep up with them, which created guilt about that, etc. But in that moment of seeing it's all good, it's all natural, it's all inevitable, there was such reassurance again, because I thought, well, actually, there already. I mean, I'm fine. I'm there's nowhere to get to. And I'm very comfortable with that. The striving stopped. More or less in that instant, which is very nice.
Yeah, that's brilliant. What I recently discovered, something that people don't talk about in the principles community, is that when we're in a lower mood, it's not the mood that's the issue. It's that we have a lot of opinions about that state.
Yeah.
So like you just mentioned, it is like once you're in a lower mood, it's like you got to take inventory. You got to find a way to get into a better mood. But we don't. When we're in a good mood, do you do inventory? When you're in a good mood, do you find a way to keep yourself there? No. Once you're in a good mood, there is no thought. We're just where we're at, and we are okay in that state of mind. It's that once we get into a state of mind that feels different, that feels not maybe comfortable, is we start to go, why do I feel this way? How long is this going to last? I should know better. I know about the principles. I should know better. I'm a psychologist. I should know better because X, Y, and Z. And the feeling will eventually rise, because it always does. But as we continue to try to find the solution in the opinion of the state, we go farther and farther away from the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, the last time I was in my recovery group, they said, well, what do you do when you're anxious then? I said, when I get anxious, I get anxious.
Mm-hmm.
But when I'm depressed, let me tell you what I do. I get depressed. In other words, I get depressed and I got to now find out what arbitrary opinion I'm going to have about it, where it came from, how did it come? Is it because of my parents? Is it because of my hereditary? Because that is just made up. That is the part that I'm going to start to just dive into, that I'm just making up, and then hopefully come up with an arbitrary solution for the problem that I am creating an opinion about. So now my recovery group comes in. It's fascinating. They'll come in and go, I'll be like, how was your day? And they'll be like, oh, it was shitty. And they go, okay, cool. How about you? And we go around, instead of me pausing and being like, tell me more. What happened? What can we do to fix it? Because they all kind of know now. They come in with kind of like I had a shitty day, but it's like, we don't need to talk about it. If you want to, we can, but the exploration is going to be irrelevant because I know it's going to change. They all intrinsically know that now. It's beautiful. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful, beautiful group.
Yeah, lovely. You just reminded me of a little thing. Right at the beginning when I first got into recovery, I remember going to the very first sort of meeting that I went to, and the person, there was somebody who was sharing at that, and it was very inspiring. But right from the start, in my heart of hearts, I was hungry. But it was a woman, and she was talking a lot about recovery. It was very positive, and I was really, really hungry for that. That's what I always wanted more of, and I think that some traditions and some people can rationalize why to focus on the problem, but it's never been a good idea for me. And I kind of instinctively knew that. I love to hear about the changes and the shifts and, the sort of leaps of consciousness, whatever language you use to describe those. Yeah. It was inspiring then, and it's inspiring now.
Well, let me ask you then. So you being in recovery, were the principles that for you then, or was this way after recovery?
Oh, way after. So okay. I think I spent many years. I mean, I got into recovery almost 30 years ago. So, and came to the principles about the same time as you, I'm guessing. But I was kind of working with a script that, I'm broken, and that with a lot of hard work I can live a nearly normal life, and in an instant that just dropped. So it's absolutely transformed my experience of life, coming across this. And I still have great respect for aspects of the 12-step fellowships and everything like that, but it seems to me that the principles have they're far more upstream. They give a more complete explanation of what's going on, and just tremendous hope and reassurance that each of us is enough now, that we have everything that we need now, and that you don't need to change in order to be okay, or work on yourself, or anything else, and what could be better than that?
Yeah, that's a brilliant way to. That was beautiful. That was beautiful.
So we mentioned at the outset, or I mentioned that you're also a businessman, and just to paint in that bit of the picture. How has this, if it has, how has this changed your life as a business owner, as an entrepreneur?
Tremendously. And I'll tell you, the biggest thing that's happened is, going back to what we were originally saying in the beginning, is I don't work with addicts. My clients are not doctors. My employees are not employees or managers. The biggest shifts that's happened for me with the principles is they're all people. And the good news about seeing everybody as a person and not their label is they're going to make mistakes. They're going to not see clearly at times. And they also have the capability of seeing it differently at any moment. So it eases my relationship with my employees, because we don't sit down as, these are the rules and you're doing it wrong, which causes you to be fired. Or at the recovery center, you're an addict, you're broken, and let me come and fix you. It's, oh, you had a human day today. Let's talk about it and see, what we didn't see and whatever. And so it just connects me as a business owner to our humanity. So I wake up and I get to be with some of the most wonderful people in the world. That to me is and that's, as I mentioned to you, as I don't really have a job. I get to wake up and go to my stores and talk to amazing people, right? And and they will screw up today. Someone is inevitably going to screw up, and I will forgive them, and I will inevitably screw up, and they will forgive me. Not because I'm the owner or because I'm this, it's because they can see my humanness and they see my frailty and my strengths. They see it all. And that's been the biggest thing. And when people, it turns out when people get to be themselves, they see the humanness of their customers. They see the humanness of their other staff. And I have 4 restaurants here in San Diego, and it's beautiful. It's nice. It's easy. It's simple. It's simple, but sometimes difficult. But the simplicity will arise out of that difficultness. It always has. And so it's that's the biggest thing I could say that's been a big shift.
That's a lovely expression. And again, so reassuring, once you've had an insight. And I mean, I hadn't expressed my own insight into it in that way, but that things can look overwhelming or impossible, but there's that part of me that knows that doesn't, it can look complex, overwhelming, or whatever, but that there are always solutions to everything. But I love the way that you put that. And just again, very reassuring, and it can kind of stop in its tracks any temptation to go wildly down the alleyway of trying to find solutions, and through grinding it out, which just puts more on your mind and usually adds to the problems.
Yeah, exactly. We go to the opinion of our state, we go to the opinion of like our lack of clarity, and it's not where the magic is going to be. It's not where I find it. And it's the more that I show up letting them see that, the more they get to see it too. It's really refreshing. It's refreshing for everybody. It's a new way to wake up to humanity, I guess you can say.
Yeah. Lovely. I noticed that we're coming towards the end of the time that we discussed. I did want to just ask you. You mentioned that you are married and very happily, and that you have a little daughter. And I'm just curious. Were you married when you came to this, or was that something or were you with your wife when you came to this understanding, or is that something?
Actually, my wife's in the room right now. She's in the office, and what's funny is, like, let me tell you how much this understanding is built into the system. When we went to see I couldn't wait to share with her what the 3 principles are, and like what who Michael Neal is, and Dick and Bettinger and all the other people. And she looked at me and said, well, isn't this just common sense? Like, why do people have to sit here and realize that thought changes, and that, anything we make personal comes from our own opinions about thought. Like she couldn't quite describe, like she loved going to see Michael Neal. And every time we left, she would say, it's common sense. It's common sense. And it is common sense. It is very commonsensical. But culturally, from whatever it is, we were taught it's not. It's like, be afraid of, go to the bookstore and like how to conquer fear, how to step away from anxiety gracefully. It's always like certain feelings are dangerous and scary, and you got to remove it right out of your life. And it wasn't like that for her. And she didn't have an easy life. Like, I mean, she had I'm not like she had a travesty of a life, but she's had stuff where most people say, oh my goodness, how did you fend for yourself and all that stuff. But she intrinsically had resilience, and she knew that. And to a point where, if I asked her, well, how did you get away from a relationship that was really toxic? She said, well, I don't know. What do you mean? I saw that it was toxic and I left. And I went, but aren't you supposed to spend 6 months going, is it my fault? Is it theirs? What does this say about me? And she goes, well, what is that going to do? And like, it didn't make sense for her. So it was beautiful, because the best thing that happened is she got to see the inner workings of why she is the way she is. Right. For me, it was like, I was a little bit dumb. I was dumber than her. And I actually didn't know that that's how the system works. So I had to I woke up to it, but it just goes to show that it really is something that we already know and we've forgotten.
Yeah.
Genuinely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what was occurring to me when you were speaking, that I was one of those people who kind of fell into a misunderstanding. It was a learned misunderstanding,
yes.
Not innocently, but it learned in the way that we learn language. But because I think we do live in a culture that suggests that certain kinds of journeys are inherently stressful, certain kinds of people are, inherently difficult, etc., etc., etc. Some people can see right through that. Others, like me, not so much. And this understanding has been really helpful in, just clearing away a lot of that misunderstanding and allowing that resilience and resourcefulness that you remember just to resurface. That was always there. It was never gone, but
right.
Yeah.
I'll leave it with the last thing that I remember I asked Michael Neal at an event. I said, surely, you got where you're at because you had 10 years of NLP and hypnotherapy and all these other modalities. So, it's easy for you to come now and say, the principles are it or whatever, when you've done everything already. So, and he said, well, if I knew the principles 10 years ago, I would have saved myself a lot of time. And that's literally what it is. And the same thing for me. It's not that you have to go learn everything first. It's when you see the truth of it, wherever you're at, if someone does NLP and continues and enjoys it, I will not stop them, because that is a part of their journey. And if they see what they see and it looks different at some point in their life, so be it. Like, that's one of the things that in the principles community sometimes irks me, is like, if someone is on a different journey, and I even did this, I had this sense of superiority that they're not seeing something and I need to save them. But if the principles are true, then nobody needs saving. They're just on a journey.
Yeah.
And we all, who knows what I'm going to see in the next year. We're going to wake up to a new reality moment to moment. So I let others wake up to their reality as they see it, as long as they'll let me do it the way I see it myself. And I think that's a better way to see where we're at in our journey.
Yeah. Beautiful. Lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Amir. I really appreciate your time today, and I know that you have to go to work, so thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. I love this. This is so cool. And let me know when this is going to be up and where.
Yes, I will do. Thank you.